Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We're going to talk about what is becoming a very, very important issue in the gaming industry. First, let me have the panelists introduce themselves briefly first.
Hi, I'm Catie Stefano. I'm Director of Community Marketing at Online Gamblers.
Hi, Bill Pascrell III, affectionately known hopefully as BP3 in the industry. I'm a partner at Princeton Public Affairs Group and head up our gaming practice.
I'm Matt Zarb-Cousin, the Director of External Affairs at Gamban.
And I'm Catania. I'm the head of RG and research at Kindred.
So the caption of the panel is America headed for problems with respect to responsible gaming? And I think at the end of this panel, you'll see, I believe the American market has clearly recognized what may be coming across the pond, as we refer to it. But again, before we talk about where we think the U.S. is headed, what is being done in the U.S., we just want to take a minute or two to talk about what's happened in the U.K. and Europe that kind of set the stage for this increase in discussion about how important responsible gaming is when it comes to the U.S. market. I'd like to start with you, Matt. Why don't we just spend a little time talking about what has been going on in UK and Europe? And again, that will set the stage for the rest of this panel discussion.
Yes, I think the 2005 Gambling Act came at a pretty awkward time in the sense that it was conceived of before smartphones were around, before the internet really took off, internet gambling. So I think the legislation itself is pretty outdated, and it took about 7 years from the enactment of the 2005 Gambling Act in 2007 for online gambling to be regulated in the Remote Gambling Act in 2014. So that in that 7 years, there wasn't adequate regulation. I think since then, the Gambling Commission has been really playing catch up. I think that it's quite a juxtaposition to what we're seeing in the States, where states are effectively designing a regulatory architecture, learning a lot of the lessons from the UK and building that from the ground up. Whereas I think, as I say, the Gambling Commission in the UK is playing catch up. And one of the reasons, one of the consequences of that is that public support and public sentiment towards the gambling industry is, unfortunately, for people in the industry, it's very, very low. And the types of reforms that have been talked about since 2014, such as limits to online stakes, online slots, affordability checks, restrictions on advertising, the creation of an ombudsman, all of these aspects of strengthening regulation of online gambling have a lot of public support. And the Conservatives in the manifesto in 2019 election committed to a review of gambling laws. That review was published or the terms of reference were published in 2020. And we're now in a phase where we're waiting for the white paper, which will formalise those recommendations. It's really not a question of, I think, political support or public sentiment. I think there's overwhelming public support for these types of reforms. It's just really a question of salience and priorities. And at the moment, the British public life lurches from one crisis to the next at the moment. So it's just a question of when it will happen. Rather than whether or not it's kind of politically expedient.
So just as a follow-up, you used the word manifesto. That's like a wild word that we don't hear in the U.S. What is this manifesto?
I apologize. So in 2019, when the Conservatives campaigned to get into government, they made a series of pledges and promises, and one of them was to review the gambling laws. And so obviously we're still in that term of government now, even though we've got a different prime minister than who was elected in 2019, and that's still a commitment, a manifesto commitment that we understand intend to deliver in some form.
Okay, and just before we move to the next part of this, it's not just UK though, right? I mean, across Europe, there's been a whole bunch of issues. You want to add to that?
Absolutely. Like Spain, for example, they've banned sports sponsorships. And I think the UK is also talking about that. Matt probably knows more. And like they mentioned in the other panels, Sweden has done a lot of limitation on retention. So I think all of Europe is just going the wrong direction. And we don't want US to go the same way.
Got it. Anything else, Maris?
It is the wrong direction, but the industry made us go this direction. So I wouldn't only blame the regulators, because I think that the industry was a bit too forceful at times. And you have to keep in mind that, you have people who have a gambling disorder, you have affected others. So the fact that you can't watch a football match without being constantly seeing betting companies, I think unless we regulate and unless we try to be sensible as the industry, then I don't blame the regulator for doing that, personally.
So from the U.S. perspective, Bill, my fellow compatriot from New Jersey, obviously Bill has been very involved since the beginning of sports betting and iGaming back in 2013. As a regulator, he used to harass me all the time. Now that I'm not a regulator anymore, he's even worse. But anyway, Bill, you have your finger on the pulse. I mean, does the U.S. industry stakeholders have an awareness of the importance of RG in the U.S.?
George, thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to have you moderate this panel. Catie, Maris, and Matt, it's a pleasure and an honor. I've worked with your organizations and you individually. Two quick things, George, if you'll permit me. One of the things I like the most, and Jasmine and Rory and Pierre, thank you for having me from iGaming Next. What an extraordinary venue. 10 years ago, if we had a conference here, or in London, or in Barcelona, you wouldn't see very many women, and you'd see even less black and brown people. That's starting to change, and I think that's a great thing, and I encourage you to go to the diversity track. That's important to me personally, and I know George has played a role in trying to encourage others to get into the industry, because the industry needs to represent the consumer. Let's talk about RG. I've represented, thanks to George, by the way, GVC now in Tain for 13 years. Wow, where has the time gone? Under the leadership of Shai Segev, who's with Dance now, and current leadership of Yetta, the new CEO, I was appointed, as Mr. Aubrey knows, in September of 2019 with Amani Toomer, who's a former NFL phenom from a favorite team of ours, the New York Giants, Super Bowl winner, and Martin Litschka, the head of regulatory affairs in RG, Maris's counterpart in North America, Martin Litschka. And our job is to promote, I never thought I'd be involved in this, right? I represent operators and vendors, suppliers, etc. I remember when I joined the National Council of Problem Gambling's Federal Affairs Board about 8 years ago, my two boys, who are now 30 and 27, said to me, Dad, what in God's name are you doing working with the National Council of Problem Gambling? You work for all those dodgy companies that take our money from the mouth of babes. George's question is very important, I think, because although each jurisdiction across the globe is unique and special, the industry in America is not there yet. As a matter of fact, the regulated industry is nascent. It's relatively new. We've been doing iGaming in Jersey and 5 other states for the greater part of 9 years. We're now re-upping that law, hopefully. We've only been doing sports betting, mobile, and land-based for 4 years since the Supreme Court decision on May 14th of 2018. I believe it's in my heart, it's not a throwaway line. This panel, the panel before, this issue is the seminal issue for the industry, particularly in America, but globally. If the operators don't allow folks like Maris to have a seat at the board table with authority, because typically the RG leads, oh yeah, come on in, oh that's nice, brush them aside, and everybody focuses on the rev site people and on the marketing and sales people. One of the things that George has a wonderful legacy in is working for being the #2 lead in the toughest regulatory regime in the world, the New Jersey DGE. And his former colleague, the director Dave Reebok, just announced in May, in collaboration with about 8 operators, including Kindred, to kind of socialize a discussion with the regulators that we need to self-regulate or what's happening in the UK and that Matt is grappling with in multiple jurisdictions in Europe is going to happen in America. So they announced some very top-line standards and principles. Nothing very difficult. Hire an RG lead, have maybe 15-second landing pages and buttons, videos to help consumers. And many in the industry push back. And it doesn't take effect until January of next year. What they don't understand, because they're also listening to their land-based partners, many of whom are clients of mine and George regulated, if the industry in America follows the industry of brick and mortar casinos, we're doomed for failure and massive regulatory overreach. What do I mean by that? Historically in America, in Nevada and Atlantic City in particular, and then elsewhere as gaming expanded, the brick and mortar industry, and my clients don't like to hear me say this, but if the truth hurts, so be it, the land-based casinos treated the gambling addicted customer as the VIP customer. Let's give them more free spins and more bonus bets and more markers. Online cannot afford to do that. And so I think America has a chance in the next 18 months to stay ahead of the curve. And you now see what Jersey did. Colorado is starting to follow, and Michigan and Illinois. And hopefully we'll stay ahead of the curve so that we don't get regulatory overreach. And my final point, Church, and I apologize for being so darn long-winded. We are one newspaper headline away from some politician's son or daughter or mother, father, brother, sister, or aunt or uncle getting hurt. And then we'll see that perhaps we should have listened to this coalition that we've been trying to build.
So, Bill, I'll circle back with you in a little bit on the panel about specifics. Maris, you are uniquely situated since Kindred, European company, lived through what's going on in Europe. Now, obviously, you have a U.S. presence. From your unique position in the industry, do you believe the U.S. industry and the stakeholders understand the importance of getting ahead of the RG issue in the States?
Personally, I don't think we get it in Europe still, to be fair, because I mean, you have to see the global picture. So if you look at UK, for example, you have a lot of operators speaking and saying RG is very important, but then you have non-GamStop casinos constantly popping up. So you literally have a GamStop option where you can self-exclude everywhere, and then you have operators that are just coming in and actually advertising themselves that you can go on. As well, there's not, I mean, okay, of course, self-regulation can be good, but I still think there should be more collaborations with other associations. For example, most of my job is speaking with people with lived experience, speaking with affected others. So talking to someone whose husband has lost millions on an online company where they were treated as VIP, so this is not just land-based. She tells me, listen, you know, trying to get my kids to school, and I'm hearing adverts on the radio at 9 a.m. in the morning. So obviously, you know, self-regulation, it's good on paper, but I don't know how realistic it always is. So I think there should be more discussions with treatment centers, with lived experience, with academics, and then we can lead the way. But for example, to what Bill mentioned with replicating what we see in the land-based to online. For example, we saw a huge issue with a lot of research looking at self-exclusion as a proxy measure. Obviously, in the land-based, if you go to self-exclude, yes, there is a high chance you have a problem because you have to go through a rigorous, you know, experience, you have to admit it, but online is just 2 clicks. So a lot of the research that was done was actually already the sample wasn't good. And that can start because academics speak to industry, because lived experience can speak to industry. So we've seen a change in Europe. Yes, we have seen improvement. I remember when I started in Kindred, I was on my own. Now you have at least 30 full-timers. You know, there is that difference. There is difference in we don't do VIP programs, but you would still have some sort of, you know, doing affordability checks because before you can have some loyalty programs. So that is changing. It's not that tough anymore to challenge commercial, but that's only our company. I know a lot of RG managers that hate their job because it's still money first, even in Europe. So it might be the case in the US, to be fair.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and we'll get into it a little bit more because I do think New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, my former employer, will be taking the lead on this, and they have a history of dragging the rest of the regulatory industry with it because they are pretty smart and forward-thinking. So let me just talk about affiliates. You normally were on the operator side. I think you were with Gig for a while.
Yeah, gig, and I was with Hard Rock in Atlantic City for
And
years.
now you've made that crazy switch to the affiliate side, which
Yes.
I don't think we see too often. So you have a unique perspective. Where is RG with respect to affiliates? Because I guess in a certain sense, they don't seem to line up. And do they have responsibilities? What should those responsibilities be from the affiliate side?
Well, so I had a panel last week about this where we talked about affiliates, and I asked them, like, what responsibilities do affiliates have? And I think I was one of few that thought responsibility goes for affiliate as well, because many think that it's just the operators that has to do the KYC, the limitations, stuff like that. But personally, I believe that the whole industry, we have a responsibility, whether it's the game providers, the platforms, the affiliates, everything. And it's going back to what Bill said, you did the 12 principles. And I noticed in the principles as well, it's mostly like that the content providers, the ambassadors has to focus more on responsible gambling, but there was nothing about game providers or platforms. So as an affiliate, I think we have to talk a lot about education because especially when it comes to the US, Americans have no idea how to bet and even so how to bet legally. It's super different and difficult in the US to figure out which operator is legal unless you know. So I think as an affiliate, we have to educate them more about how to set the limits, why you should set limits. We also have to talk more about how to not target underage people. And I think also as affiliates, there's so many different regulations going on. Like in different states, you're allowed to bet on college betting. Some states you're not. So I think affiliates has to just take more responsibility and make sure that they target the right market for the right subject.
So again, let me go off script a little. I promise I'd do this to you. And you said you'd get mad at me, so let's see if you get mad at me. If you were a regulator, what would be like one of the most important things that you would impose on an affiliate that balances their right, obviously, to engage in business, but takes into account RG? Is there anything in particular that you think is glaring, whether it's a standard or a reg?
I think they just need to educate more about like what is normal. Like just we talk about like financial as well. We talk about if not gambling, but like if you go into financial, you say like you're supposed to put away 25% I think for your salary, for your rent, and there's also a certain percentage for entertainment. And I think we as an affiliate, I would like to see more people talking about gambling as entertainment and making sure that you don't spend too much money on entertainment. Yeah.
Okay, you're not mad at me, are you?
No, not at all. Don't worry.
So let's get back to New Jersey. And again, I have a certain bias, and I really do think they're the best ever. So there's our plug for Dave Rebuck, my former boss, who's still there. So Bill, let's drill in a little on this. New Jersey had its own manifesto, so to speak.
Clearly.
Thanks, Matt, for that word. But also, I think they're moving towards more requiring technology-driven RG from the DGE standpoint. Can you just give us a little background on what you've heard from DGE with respect to that?
We started talking to the regulators, and particularly the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, about 2 years ago. Launched a boot camp in Great Park, Kindred, and Entain at my alma mater, Seton Hall Law School, on compliance, responsible gaming, and integrity. Working with Harvard Medical School, Entain has put up $10 million for a multi-year study and another $5 million to UNLV for a multi-year study. So it's not just people like me coming up with opinions. It's research-based studying to find solutions. The issue, I'm going to talk about America because that's my particular bailiwick. The issue is pretty simple. We are where we are in great part because of the industry, and we're not there yet significantly because of the industry It's the industry's responsibility to get out in front. I abhor when an operator, including clients, will blame the regulators. It's ridiculous. You have particular control now to set the landscape. So I was extraordinarily impressed, not just that Dave Reebok would take multiple meetings, and by the way, we just announced last week, I was in Barcelona last week, Martin Litschke, the Entain Foundation, FanDuel, DraftKings, MGM, MGM Resorts, and Bally's. 6 of the largest operators in America announced the 12 RG principles. Nothing extraordinary, but it's a start. Here's what I think, and Director Reebok is starting to work with us on this, George, that I think is very important, but it's also very sad. My son was in Australia. He's working for a public company with me in February. And he got into the pokies massively. Betting above his head, betting obscenely. And, he was 29. He just turned 30 at the time. So I'm not there to watch a 30-year-old. I wasn't sitting.
Right, who's watching you?
He was watching me, thank you, because I was on the next slot machine doing the same thing. Right. He comes back to New Jersey, and he calls me up, and he says, Dad, I hope you're not going to be mad at me. I said, oh, God. What's going on? And I'm thinking the worst, as a typical dad would do. And he says, Dad, I think I've got a little problem. I just put myself on a self-exclusion list. I said, fantastic, I'm not mad. I said, but just remember, because he's traveling the country, isn't it a crime that we're not yet lobbying in an organized way to have a national self-exclusion list? It's abhorrent that I live in Jersey, I could self-exclude. Okay, I'm on the list for a year or 2 years or whatever. All I got to do is go across the border to Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Jersey, and I can still gamble. The industry's got to get ahead of that and at least start to shoot over the bow to say, we care about our customers enough that we're going to do this. You can't play BS with the regulators. Either you're for serious stuff that this organization does every day. Good to see you, Melissa and Steve. I don't know your colleague, but hello. Gamban, what they're doing, and they're trying to get traction in the US, is so critical, as well as many others. But the fact that we have an affiliate here, a major operator here, all looking to move the dial, everybody's got to jump in. But the fact that we have to self-exclude in each state, so when Billy goes to California or Vegas in a week or two with us, George, he's got to put himself on their self-exclusion list. Is he going to do that? Probably not. But what Dave Reebok did, and George's seminal question on innovation, he brought Afshin Lashkari, who's the head of the lab, into the conversation. You would never see that from a regulator. The head of the lab, Jersey's the only state in the US that has their own lab certifications. They don't use the other third parties as the primary. And there's a reason for that, and that's not the topic here. But Afshin's been intimately involved in talking to folks like Kindred and Entain and DraftKings and FanDuel and so on and so forth to talk about innovative ways to bring solutions to this problem.
Yes. So again, thank you, Bill, right on point, and thanks for the real-world example with your son.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big deal. I know him, and
Yeah,
I'm glad he's a responsible kid in that respect. That's a big decision for him to do. And as Bill mentioned, DG is going to focus on, and I'm going to turn to Matt real quick, DG's focus on using AI and ML type products, and they're going to demand that operators show them what type of products they're using to satisfy RG, and DG is going to say whether it is acceptable or they've done enough or they have not. So Matt, let's just take a few minutes. I have 5 minutes, and there's a couple other questions I'm determined to get through. So let me just point to you. What can operators unilaterally do to balance RG with obviously their commercial goals?
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult in particularly a market like Britain, because depending on what statistic you look at, quite a significant proportion of revenue is coming from people who are addicted or at risk. So in that context, if you did something that was effective, you would be reducing profit in the short term. But what I would say is there may not be a long term otherwise. That's the solution. That's the reality. So the solution needs to be based on a recognition that maybe it will cost operators a bit of money in the short term, but it will lead to long-term sustainability. And there's a couple of, I think, different aspects to this. So there's the people that are addicted and have lost everything and they want to self-exclude. From my perspective, I believe in Gamban. I was a co-founder of Gamban, offering that software so people can block access to all gambling sites and apps as well, wherever they are in the US or wherever they are in the world even. So I think that's really important. But I think rolling back, the other aspect to this is also the people that maybe are at risk or maybe are on that progression towards getting addicted. How can we implement policies in that phase to ensure that people don't lose more than they can afford or don't do themselves significant harm? Now, it may well be that those people are addicted already, in which case, the objective should be to curtail harm and get them into treatment. But there are some instances where people will lose way more than they can afford, but not be necessarily addicted. It may just be a binge, or it may just be that. And if you can stop at those people self-excluding through affordability checks or limits or whatever the policies are, and get those enacted across the sector via the regulator eventually, then I think it will lead to a more sustainable industry. It might even lead to more profit in the long term because you've got more gamblers and you've got fewer people losing all the money in one go. So I think it's really getting this. I think really the immediate kind of existential threat is on the political sustainability, but I think commercial sustainability and political sustainability go hand in hand, really. So, as I say, the industry and the operators have to be prepared to maybe do things that might cost them money in the short term.
Yeah, and Gamban's been ahead of this issue for 2 or 3 years now, and it's good to see that finally companies like them are now going to get their fair due, so to speak. We have a couple other questions. Maris, you see, and again, you can see the clock ticking there, so let's just try and stay somewhat within
I can just
that
say
time
okay
period,
with
because
whatever.
there are people back there that get mad at me if we go too far over. So in Europe, there's been this growing, I don't know if the word is connection between regulators and academics. And some people think it's a good idea. Other people think it could be a good idea. Other people think it's a bad idea. Just briefly touch on that, and where do you see that going in Europe, and how may it slide over to the US as well?
There was a transition in gambling research. Before, you would rely on, for example, getting data from students in a lab, whereas nowadays, online, you have all the objective data. So that's really good. But also, research can actually enlighten some of the operators with really simple things, like what you mentioned now. When you have someone who's getting close to addiction, they become such a burden for the operator. They become abusive, they start threatening. The costs there are huge. So whatever money you made from that person, it's not worth it. And that was actually a research published in 2012, where they looked into this, where they saw that people who get closer to self-exclusion, to problems, they become abusive. Abusive will actually happen then that they will become abusive to your staff. Your staff will get burned out. They will resign. You have to recruit. That's so much cost for the industry. And as well, it's good to see all these collaborations that you mentioned, for example, where you have longitudinal studies. But it's also good to actually publish as much as you can. So even for the head of RG, when the person goes to the board, as you mentioned, and says, listen, I want to do this, most of the time you will hear, but why? But if you have academic research actually supporting you, that's much easier. Right. The problem is that you have academics on one side, you have regulators on one side, and the industry. And you don't have that coordination. And that is a huge mess. Because we know, for example, there was the research we published bonus begging can be an indicator of harmful gambling. It didn't need to be published, but it was a surprise to a lot of people. And there needs to be the collaboration with the industry because the industry knows their data, and researchers should be comfortable to use that data without thinking that they're going to be influenced, because then there's another topic.
Okay. I'm going to get this last question in, Catie. You only have like a minute or two because we're past our time. But
Yeah.
let's talk about the Twitch ban.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's an important step forward. So could you just tell us about it briefly and where you see that going?
Well, basically what happened is I think a lot of people in here are aware that Twitch recently banned unlicensed casinos like Stick.com. And I think it's very important because they're targeting markets that are they're not regulated in, which also creates a lot of issues. So I think that what caused everything with Twitch was there was a streamer who borrowed money from his fellow streamers and fans. And in the end, it came out that he had gambled away the money. So there was other streamers who pushed Twitch to take action because this is not okay. And I think they're going to come out with more information in a couple of days, 18th of October. But yeah, it's going to be big change there. And personally, I think that streamers are a type of affiliate. They have to take responsibility. And just like Maria said, there's no connection in between like the regulators and even like when it comes to Twitch and the streaming, like there's platform providers and game providers who goes in and tweak these spins that the streamers are doing. So it looks like they can spend so much money, they're winning so much, and it's not accurate. And we need to have more realistic view on that.
Terrific. So I'd like to thank Bill, Catie, Maris, and Matt. You guys were well prepared. It's always a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thank you.